Oh, hi, everybody. My name is Matt Storrs, and welcome to Mattsplaining. On today's episode, I have an expert on who I'm very excited to speak with. Expert, please introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Jill McLennan, and I am what's called a death doula. So I am an expert on death, dying, grief, kind of everything that goes around with that time in a human's life.
Fantastic. Yeah, I feel like I am pretty knowledgeable when it comes to death, dying, and grief. And I think that one of the main and most important things that a lot of people overlook, at least in traditional media, is that there's this predisposition of film and television having these narratives where people are coming to accept the fact that they're going to die and like coming to terms with it. And I think that the most important thing that anybody can do in real life is to just avoid that concept as much as possible and just deny the fact that death or grief or anything associated with that is coming up. And so take out a credit card, max it out, go and explore and live your life as much as possible, and don't make any specific plans for what's going to happen or what people are going to need to do. And don't go through the emotional processing that you would potentially need to do to come to terms with that, or like reach out to people that you may have wronged in the past or may have wronged you in the past. Just set it up so that when you die, they get an attorney to go to their house with some legal paperwork articulating in life this, like, for instance, this is what I have set up. This will be helpful. So like when I die, I have it so that my attorney will have to seek out all of the people that I've previously dated, and he's going to have to give a portion of my retirement to these people based on how long we dated. And like some of them, it's going to be like $15. Other ones, people that I've dated for longer periods of time, they're going to get a much bigger portion of that. But even though I didn't take the effort to go out and try and make amends for not making a reservation and having to go to Applebee's for a couple of dates, and not because I was part of the Applebee's short-lived Applebee's rewards program and I wanted to get the points. It's definitely not because of that. It's only because the place where I got reservations, they were booked up or they double booked us, whatever I told them. The people, I don't have to go and ask for forgiveness at this point because they are going to get that portion of my retirement. And I think well, I can die happy and die knowing that I have gotten their forgiveness and they're going to get some degree of a good meal or whatever. They don't have to go out and get a meal, but they're gonna remember me fondly. And if nothing else, I'm making it so that my attorney is going to have an adventure, because some of these people that I've dated, they've moved all across the world. So I don't know if any of them are in Antarctica, but there's always the possibility that he might have to take a trip to Antarctica because they're working as a researcher down there now. And like that would be a very fun thing for him. And that but a lot of them it's basically going to kind of work as a class action lawsuit. And I think that more people should set this sort of thing up. And so that way lawyers have a more interesting life when their clients die. And then also kind of gives you a reprieve from having to do the hard work of having those tough conversations with your loved ones as you get close to death. And then it helps them, those loved ones, with the grieving process because they have $15. They have a lawyer who has these new travel stories. They may be able to make recommendations of places they could travel to based on the people that they've had to meet up with. Now, based on what you've heard so far, about how much of that would you say was accurate?
Well, I was quietly laughing to myself over here because I have never quite heard that perspective about the lawyer having to
Okay,
travel around and find all the people. Definitely got me over here giggling.
good.
I would say the only thing that you really had accurate is that the way that media portrays death and dying and grief is not accurate as to what the reality is. That's
I
probably
see.
about the only thing you got right.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yes.
Fantastic. So what would you say is a more accurate articulation of the death and dying process?
So, as you pointed out, in media, we don't see an accurate representation of death and dying and grief. And so, most people are not prepared for the realities of what it's actually going to look like. And we do often deny the fact that we're going to die, that our loved ones are going to die. We don't want to have the conversations, so we avoid it as long as possible, thinking that avoiding it is going to somehow prevent us from ever having to experience these things. And really, in the long run, it just adds to the pain, the suffering, the trauma, all the negative things that we're actually trying to avoid by avoiding the conversations.
I see.
And right, it's like it's actually doing the opposite of really what we're trying to do.
Hmm.
And really, you even mentioned about maxing out your credit cards and just living your life. And I have found personally that the more that I was able to be okay with my mortality, the more that I was able to think about what I want at the end of life, plan for it, prepare for it, the more I actually live life in a more present and full way. And so, kind of, you touched on that of like, we really need to live our lives, not just obsess and focus and be so worried about death. But having death awareness is really not the same thing as being morbid and obsessing about death. It's actually understanding the reality that we will die. And so, what is really important to me right now? How do I want to live my life right now? Maybe not maxing out credit cards because that's
Right.
just kind of a bad idea. But also, there's a lot of things in life that we do it because we're just kind of going through the motions. We're doing it because that's what we were told we should do. That if we really sat and asked ourselves, if I found out I was dying in a month, would I be doing these things?
Right.
And right, it's like when we think of it that way, then sometimes we get really clear on I'm just doing this because I think I have to, not because it's bringing me any joy, not because I want to do it. I could be spending time with my family. I could be, hanging out with my children and my loved ones, but instead I'm on this like Zoom call, not your Zoom call, but
Thank
like
you.
on
Thank
this
you.
Zoom call for this meeting for this group that I got pressured into being in, like it's those types of things. So,
Right.
yes, we really
Try
do need to live life.
absolutely living present. Well, at least what I feel like I'm hearing you say is like living presently in the life that you want to be living.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. And so, like, what are some of the things that when you speak to people that are going through this, what are some of the things that they can do to kind of get to a point where they can recognize, like, what are some things that people can do to help recognize what might be valuable to them in that time?
There's a lot of different things that we can ask ourselves about.
Okay.
And probably the first place to start, and this will change depending on where you're at in your life. Like right now,
Hmm.
I'm 45, I'm fairly healthy. When I say to myself, if I found out I did only have, maybe a couple months left to live, what would be important to me? At that point, I would probably try any, experimental treatment. I would try anything and everything that could potentially save my life or extend my life for a couple of years because I'm young, I have children, there's still a lot of things I want to do. If you
Right.
ask me that question when I'm 85 or 90, there's going to be a different answer. But yet, our medical model, right? When you talk to
Hmm.
doctors, for the most part, it doesn't matter if you're 45 or if you're 85. They're going to say, you need to try chemo, you need to try radiation, we got to give you surgery, we need to do all these things. What is important to me is going to change, but it's going to be also very individual for the person. So I definitely, some treatments that people get, it makes them feel very ill.
Hmm.
They can't really participate in things in life. And so I want to know that I will be comfortable, that my pain will be managed, that I'm not going to potentially bankrupt my family, that I'm not going to be a huge burden on my family. And so once I get clear on what it is that I want, then as I face different situations. I can ask the questions that I need to ask because, again, oftentimes doctors are just saying all these things to us. And if we were to say, hey, what's the chance of survival? Is this going to extend my life? Is it going to put me in a lot of pain and suffering? Like, what's the realities of it? If we ask the right questions, we're going to get informed, or we're going to get the information we need to make informed decisions, which is really important. But I know that's a big step for a lot of people. So I think really the first smallest step is what is important to me? Do I want to be surrounded by my loved ones? Do I want to be in my home? And then we can kind of start branching out from there. But it is an unusual conversation and it's an unusual thought process for so many people because, again, we've avoided it for a really long time.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that it becomes it's something that's kind of taboo. There's a degree of having to accept it first to be able to even go into that conversation. And I think we very often try to detach ourselves from that realization, if that makes sense.
Yes. And we really do have a hard time facing the fact that we're going to die. And so sometimes I'll say that to people too. If nothing else, just say that out loud to yourself. I'm going to
Mhm.
die. One day I'm going to die. And most people have never even said that out loud. They don't say death. They don't say died. They don't say dying. The person passed away. Oh, we lost them. I lost my grandmother. Well, no, we didn't lose grandma. Grandma died. Like, it's
Right.
okay to say the words. But if we don't start by saying the words, we're never going to get more comfortable having the conversations.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when people start to recognize that stuff, I feel like I think the idea of grief, very often we kind of associate it with after somebody has passed away, but I would expect that there is a degree of grief that happens before somebody passes away too. The personal grief, the grief of other people around us would that be kind of an accurate articulation, or is that something you've seen?
Yes, we do go through a process of grieving before somebody dies.
Okay.
And its technical term is anticipatory grief, right? We're
Okay.
anticipating the death of the person. And so we start this grieving process, but we don't even realize that that's what we're going through. We don't realize that that's what we're feeling in a lot of cases. And so we, again, culturally as a society, we don't really deal well with grief. And the more that we can acknowledge that, your loved ones are already grieving before somebody dies and working with that grief in a way that we can process it, we can honor it, then we can really be present with the people that we love before they die and take that time to, it sounds weird to say, but it can be a really beautiful experience to be with somebody as they're nearing the end of life because it is something that is totally normal and natural for human beings. And it can be so intimate. People's walls really come down, they open up, they might share things that they've never shared before. And so, if we can recognize what we're feeling and what we're experiencing, we can be present for it, where oftentimes a lot of it'll be that like, no, you're fine, you're not dying yet, I don't want to talk about this yet. Well, I mean, they want to talk about it. Let's have this conversation, let's hear what they have to say, and really bond with our loved ones in a way that we can't do on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. Having tough conversations and taking the kind of rigidity and chipping away at it to make it more of like a smooth, comfortable conversation. What are some of the things that people can do if they're starting to feel grief after somebody has died, or continuing to feel grief and it's kind of adapting? What are things that people might be able to do?
Most people don't realize that when you're grieving, you can really go through a wide variety of emotions. I think, again, on TV, we just see the sad, people are crying, but there can be anger, there can be relief, there could be gratitude. There, of course, is going to be sadness as well. We can go through a wide range of emotions and really honoring those emotions, not saying, I shouldn't feel relieved. That means that I didn't love them. I shouldn't
Mhm.
feel anger. it's okay to feel all of those things, and honoring those feelings is a great place to start. I'm somebody that I like to create rituals for myself around, I would say, big moments in life, right? And the
Mhm.
death of a loved one is a big moment in life. And so, really setting aside time for yourself to feel your grief, whether it's just 10 minutes before you go to bed, maybe you get out a journal, light a candle, do something that is really giving yourself that permission and that time to feel all the feelings and to process them. Because our culture, depending on who died, really gives us a timeline. If it's a parent, you get this much time. If it's a
Mhm.
child, you get this much time. Like that's not the way that grief works. We're not going to fit it into these little tiny boxes. So we need to give ourselves that time and that space and that permission to feel it and to honor it and to kind of allow it to move through us. It never goes away completely, but we can get it to a place where we can function well in our day-to-day life and feel okay that the person has died. Because again, it's part of the reality of life that people die and we don't know when it's going to happen. And unfortunately, as much as we like to think, well, children aren't supposed to die before their parents, it does happen to people. We can't really control that. And it doesn't mean that we can ever be okay. I would never be like, oh, it's fine if one of my children died. Like, no, it would be terrible. I would be heartbroken. But you can work through this grief so that you can still function and live your daily life and just understand that it's part of being a human is loss and death and grief and sadness and all of those things as much as happiness and joy and all the really quote unquote positive feelings are.
Absolutely. Jill, this has been so insightful. I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I feel like I have learned quite a bit. If people wanted to learn more about you or more about this topic, where would you recommend that they go?
So my business name is End of Life Clarity. That's what I am on all of my social medias. I do try to post, videos and things to get people really thinking about this topic, talking about the topic. But you're welcome to reach out to me on any of the social media or on my website, and I can definitely give you links so that people can
Okay.
easily find me.
Wonderful. Jill, I can't thank you enough. This has been just an absolute delight. And I feel I don't know if this is something that you experience, but just being able to talk to somebody about this has kind of, made me feel a little bit lighter. So
Yes.
that's it's really quite nice. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. My name is Matt Storrs, and this has been Mattsplaining. Before we go today, I want to thank Ryan Lawson, my dear friend and all around okay guy, for making the theme music for Mattsplaining. And if anyone needs music production or mixing services for any of their projects, Ryan can be reached at beatblenderstudios@gmail.com or at Beat Blender Studios on Instagram and TikTok.